How is it that you've come to understand prayer more as a way of life than an activity we do?
Jeff, that's a matter of a life's experience more than anything else. I've gone through every stage. I used to have a prayer corner in my room with a prie-dieu there so that I could get into the kneeling position and make sure I knew that I was praying. And I can remember as a young man, a teenager, and even a young priest, reading prayer manual after prayer manual and trying to find a way to practice what I thought was the expectation of my religion and my profession, and feeling guilty because none of it ever made a lot of sense, and it was more a discipline and a drudgery than it was a source of life. And then as you live into the life of a pastor, which you certainly would understand, in the words of our prayer book, when you share life with people who are in trouble, sorrow, need, sickness, or any other adversity, you begin to temper your prayer thoughts with real life experience. Mm-hmm. There were two experiences in my life that I think shaped my understanding of prayer most dramatically. One was a young mother of three, the wife of a country doctor in southwestern Virginia, mm-hmm. who I'd gotten to know very well through her activities in the diocese that I was living in at that time. And I'd left that diocese and been gone for about a year, and I got a call from her, sort of out of the blue, that she was in the hospital in Charlottesville and would like very much for me to come by and see her. So I went up the next day. And I discovered that this woman was living with a fatal diagnosis that she had just received, a metastatic carcinoma. And when somebody is dying, you enter into life at a very deep level if you're going to talk with them at all about that. There's something about knowing that death is imminent that makes all of the game playing that people do in relationships disappear. Right. So I spent maybe 2.5 hours with her that day, sort of roaming through her life, having her reminisce, dealing with her grief, her fear, her anger, her pain, her sadness, all of the human things of knowing that she would not see her 3 children grow up, graduate, be married, have grandchildren, all of those mortality issues focused for her. And in the course of being with her in that rather deep and intimate way for that period of time was an expansive experience for me, and I hope an expansive experience for her. But after about 2.5 hours, when it was time to leave, I shifted into my ordained capacity, and I suggested that Cornelia and I would have a prayer together. Now, she didn't object. We were good friends, and I'd been there with her for 2.5 hours, and it was sort of, if you need to do that, you go ahead and do that kind of response. So I had a prayer with her, and it was the typical prayer of my profession. I know how to do that. I strung together one pious cliche after another, trying to cover my sense of embarrassment as much as anything else. And when I finished, I felt diminished by that prayer, and I thought she might have felt diminished. And I remember driving home that day. It was about an 1.5-hour journey. And I just compared the two experiences, the experience that I called prayer and the experience that I would have called counseling or sharing life intimately with a person who was in a very difficult position. Mm-hmm. And as I compared those two things, one of them expanded life and one of them contracted life. Mm-hmm. One of them seemed to open me to a relationship and indeed to God and to transcendence, and the other seemed to close me. And so I raised the question about which really was the prayer. Was the prayer the words I rattled off under the guise of praying, or was the prayer sharing my life and God's presence intimately in a very painful human situation? Well, I do dramatic things from time to time, and I was a young man then. So I said I would take a vow that I would never again pray in a pastoral situation until I could pray as honestly as I could live in that situation with that person. And that became a defining sort of moment for me. I wrote my first book out of that experience. It was entitled Honest Prayer. It's long, out of print. But it was my attempt to say something about the power of the experience outside the cliches of praying. Mm-hmm. And it was my first step into that. Now, the book's out of print for good reasons. I've changed a lot since that time. I don't go back on anything I said there, but I've taken it a lot further. And I've had an opportunity to write other things about prayer, and I've also had other experiences about prayer. it's important to define what prayer is not, as much as it is to say what prayer is. And so many people, when they say they are praying, are really demanding that God do their bidding, do their will. The prayers are really very strange. Why would anybody want to pray for God to do something that if they didn't pray, God might not do, because God needs to be flattered by having lots of requests come to God? That would make a lot of sense to me. But that's the way we've been taught to pray.